Shadow of Mordor, this is not a game that's explicitly tied to any of the movies, just kind of taking place in the world, and we're kind of seeing some new stuff out of Lord of the Rings. How difficult was it to make the decision to kind of branch off and do your own thing?
I think the decision to do it was really easy. The challenge of executing it was really hard. But, I think our starting point was we wanted to follow the example of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, where they're both these sort of amazing standalone stories that can either act as prequels and sequels to each other or parts of the greater history of Middle-earth, however you want to enjoy them. So it was really important that we could make a story that you can enjoy on its own, even if, you have never experienced the others. But if you see it as a sequel to The Hobbit, there's lots of really interesting connections there. If you see it as the prequel to Lord of the Rings, there's a lot of connections. If you think of all the connections to the deeper history of Middle-earth and that lore, that's there as well.
When you guys did your gameplay reveal, very impressive, but there were some people that just kind of, I guess, archetyped it as Assassin's Creed with Lord of the Rings. What would you say to those people? How would you make the case for, no, this is something new and different?
I mean, that's been one of the fantastic things, of course, about E3, is that I don't think we've really had anyone who's gotten their hands on the game that has seen it as being anything other than its own thing. It is a third-person open-world action game. It does have stealth and traversal and melee combat, and also a lot of other things as well. The ability to manipulate your environment, the ability to use the powers of the Wraith and domination, bend them to your will. So, I think we're really confident that as people see more, and certainly as they get their hands on it, it's something very unique.
What features do you think are the most unique? Like, if you were to say, this is why you should care about this game, what would you say?
I think the thing we're really trying hard to bring to action gaming is to give you the most interesting and the most fun and the most diverse enemies that we possibly can. So, in an action game, pretty much one of the number one cornerstones of the action is interacting with your enemies, is fighting against your enemies, competing against your enemies. And so, that's where we didn't want to have generic cannon fodder. We didn't want to have canned bosses where you can just go and read the walkthrough, and if you've beaten that once, you've seen it all. At both ends of that spectrum, from every grunt you meet in the world, he's got the potential to grow into something meaningful, through to the ultimate kind of uber bosses you're going to meet at the game. They're going to be guys that you've met 4, 5, 6, 7 times before, but as part of your own uniquely created story, not just as something we've kind of scripted and told you to go through because it's mission 7 or whatever. Drac. So there, he's an example. He was no one until that. He's just a generic guy in the world. Now, because you basically are, this is Inglourious Bastards. You're behind enemy lines, kind of taking the fight to the enemy.
So is the idea that you kind of generate an identity for a given monster and then make them be a character from then on?
Yeah, exactly. So they have the seed of a personality in them, like a personality type, whether they're a sort of a sadistic, professional, commanding, thuggish. They've got a base sort of personality archetype, but then depending on what happens to them in the world, they'll grow into different roles. So you could have a commander who grows into the role of being a trainer, or a sadist that grows into the role of maybe a trainer as well, or maybe beating on slaves, or maybe hunting monsters. So you get these interactions between their personalities, what their job is in the world, how much they climb up in the orc hierarchy, and in particular, I think really what makes that pay off and come together is they remember your personal interactions with them. So, if they just barely survived the last fight and their best friend was burned to death, they're going to remember that, and they're going to call you out on that the next time you meet them.
Interesting. So what were some of your inspirations for setting up this system? Because when I look at that screen showing kind of the orc hierarchy, I see like Warhammer figurines on a board. Is that kind of what you guys were thinking, or what went into that?
I think that's a good one. I think that's absolutely part of the inspiration. I think, of course, Middle-earth itself. So, in the movies, the amazing, these hero orcs that emerge out of that story. So Lurtz, where we see that fight against Aragorn, or Gothmog. So having these guys sort of rise up and distinguish themselves. And I think also how much effort people have put into character progression on the player side or on the NPC side. What does that look like if you put all of that onto your enemies and you actually turn those into meaningful relationships as well?
Kind of stepping back from the gameplay design a little bit, this game is on your own engine. And that seems like a thing that would be more and more cost prohibitive to do, just with all the tech and time that must go into making a game that looks like this. So from a studio perspective, it seems surprising to me that you guys are still on your own engine, your own internal thing, but does it have benefits that maybe aren't obvious from the outside?
I think it has, enormous benefits. we can't really, I guess, generalize about what other people's experiences might be, but from our point of view, as Monolith, there's just some incredibly smart, talented, hardworking guys, and the fact that you've got this technology and these guys completely dedicated to supporting exactly the game that we're trying to make. So you're not trying to adapt an engine to fit into what your requirements are. We're working on one game at the studio, so the requirements of the technology and the requirements of the gameplay are completely in lockstep with each other.
Would you say performance is the number one thing that gamers are going to appreciate because of that decision, or is there maybe another feature to the game that really got amped up because you guys made it all from scratch?
I think the other one, Monolith certainly has a great heritage in AI. So I think when we've got an innovation like the Nemesis system, having these guys have personality and having this diversity and having these systems that can constantly surprise you by how they interact with each other, the AI is really a cornerstone of that. So it's rendering, it's performance, it's animation, it's facial animation, it's characters, it's having the tools to create these worlds and create these worlds with the systems in lockstep. So I think that's what's really challenging and fun about making a game like this, is that it is a system of systems. So everything has to work together, and again, having our own technology has kind of made that possible. Certainly helped.
So I grew up reading Lord of the Rings like every good nerd did. And I remember when I saw Peter Jackson's movies, I was like, this is the first time Lord of the Rings has been genuinely badass. And now you've got this guy who can teleport around, cutting off heads. It seems like it's even getting more. Was that your intent, to make Lord of the Rings a little more metal and awesome?
I think we definitely looked at the mythical, the roots of Lord of the Rings. Like our starting point was, not to want to do something that's an oversimplified black and white good guys, bad guys. We looked at, certainly a starting point was the big what if that comes up again and again in the stories, is Boromir gets the One Ring and we should use the Ring of Power. This is the weapon of the enemy. We should use that against him. It's only by matching his ruthlessness that we've got any chance of winning. And Saruman, obviously, particularly in the books, is the only way you've got any chance to take on the power of the Dark Lord is by building an army of Uruk-hai. It's basically by matching his super weapons and taking them up against him. Galadriel herself, she's tempted by the ring, but if she took it, she would match Sauron in power, but you wouldn't have a Dark Lord, but a Dark Queen. So that what if just gets hit on again and again and again as you go through Lord of the Rings in particular. So we really wanted to explore that. And also, I think the mythic, the deeper history of Lord of the Rings. So you see characters like Beren and Fëanor. There's some really badass characters in there. They're very deeply part of the lore, and I think the history and the mythology that make Middle-earth feel like such a real place, such an authentic place.
All right, so when are we going to be able to sample that authenticity ourselves?
So we're shipping on October 7th, so not too long to wait now, and yeah, we're really excited.
And which platforms?
It's coming out on PlayStation 4, PlayStation 3, Xbox One, Xbox 360, and PC.
Thanks a lot, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
The game looks amazing, oh my god.
Thanks a lot.
Suffer me now!
We were to do everything real time throughout the game, start to finish.
Oh, it's so great. We're actually watching it happen right now. And this is something we haven't yet seen. We saw it during the Sony press conference. We saw you fighting, was it a werewolf? Or was it
Yeah, the lichen. So that was
a lichen,
That was
okay.
the first reveal of the lichen.
Right, so what's happening in this gameplay? What's going on?
So this gameplay is showing kind of a different aspect of the game, which is more focused on kind of the core third-person action cover shooter. And this is set in the area of Whitechapel, which is kind of more of the kind of